Hey, Alan Rowland. Now, our lecture today, or I shouldn't really call it a lecture, let's say our presentation today, my presentation, going to be quite a bit different than the ones that you ordinarily hear from me if you do view these presentations anyway. And I want to start with the Ice Age. And we've all heard about the Ice Age. It's something that we don't talk about very much today anyway. But the Ice Age on planet Earth existed about 35,000 to about 11,000 BCE. That means that the Ice Age ended about 13,000 years ago. And during that time, there were huge glaciers that covered northern parts of North America, northern Europe, northern Asia. Things were considerably different at that time. There were animals at that time that were much different than the animals that we have today, in those regions anyway. We had animals such as the giant ground sloth, you had the giant beaver, you had the large bison, big bison. I prefer the name, the Steppe Bison. You had the saber-toothed cat that would be present there. The woolly mammoth was one of those animals. The woolly rhinoceros was another one. And we could just go on and on with some of those animals. But during this time, it was extremely cold, and the ocean's depth dropped, and it dropped as much as 200 feet. So carry yourself in your mind, if you will, up to where the Bering Strait is. And when the ocean's depth dropped about 200 feet, this created a land bridge. Today, many people refer to it as Beringia. And this land bridge, which was perhaps as much as 600 miles wide. And some of the animals of the area of where, say, northern Asia is, where Siberia is, they would cross, and they crossed this land bridge. And I don't mean like in a single day. I'm talking about over the course of thousands of years. And early human beings at that time likewise crossed, not to colonize North America, but they were in search of food, and they were following their food sources there. Here we had such people as the Neanderthal, Clovis people, etc. with that. All right, now I want to go ahead, and by the way, as time went on and the Ice Age ended about 13,000 years ago, and glaciers began to recede and move north, then many of the coal-bearing animals that were in North America or in northern Europe began likewise to move north. They were following the colder environments. So anyway, as the Earth's temperatures began to warm, this served as demise for some of the animals of that period of time, some of the large animals of that period. All right, and also some of the people of that time. But this was in combination with some of these early people serving as predators for these animals, such as the mammoth. So I'll get to my subject in just a few minutes here. But let's take ourselves to about 1953. And I lived at that time, I was a young boy, about 4 years of age, 1953. My dad was a principal of Warrior High School. And a man by the name of James A. Phillips. I can remember him. I remember him very well, even in my early youth. But Mr. Phillips was an old man. I can remember, thinking back from, my being about 4 or 5 years of age, and Mr. Phillips was probably in his 70s. And Mr. Phillips gave to my dad, I guess because he was a principal of the high school, gave to him these huge amounts of bones. And my dad told me that they were mammoth bones, woolly mammoth bones, and I didn't think much about it. I looked at the bones. They were huge in size, about the size of me, as a matter of fact, there. And anyway, and I got to thinking about this years and years later, because my dad had always told me that Mr. Phillips lived in Alaska for a period of time. So if he was 70 years of age in the early 1950s, and if you take yourself to the Klondike gold rush that took place, the late 1890s, then the times match up, and he would have been in Alaska. And that is where he collected these mammoth bones and brought them back. All right, so anyway, it's an interesting story. Well, subsequently, my family moved to Jasper, Alabama, and ironically, strangely enough, the bones went with us. And they eventually made their way out to our Blackwater property, into my dad's shop, where they were stored in a couple of quite large boxes. And some were so large, some of the bones were so large you couldn't even store them in boxes. And there they remained for about 60 years. Well, I went into retirement a few years ago, and I didn't think much about those bones until just a month or so ago. And so I decided, well, I think I'm going to drag those mammoth bones out again and take a look at them. And sure enough, I did spread all the bones out. It covered an 8-foot table, a regular-sized card table, and not only that, I had bones scattered across my shop floor. So let's go into our presentation. I had that long introduction, but let's go into our presentation, which deals with the woolly mammoth. All right, and those are the skeletal bones that I want to show you today. This is what a woolly mammoth looked like during that time. Of course, they are extinct today. Notice the 2 ivory tusks. Some of those tusks could get up to 8, 10, or even in excess of that feet in length. So you can see the scientific name, Mammothus primigenius. It had a height of up to 10 feet. That's 9 foot 2 inches up to 10 foot 4 inches. That is the size of an African elephant today. And of course, the woolly mammoth had a rather close kinship with the elephants as we recognize today, and weighed up to 4.5 to 6 tons. It existed during the middle Pleistocene period into the Holocene epoch. All right, and for the woolly mammoth, it went extinct 8,000 years ago. Now, that is not exactly correct. For the majority of the woolly mammoth species, they went extinct at that time. Some survived on St. Paul Island. St. Paul Island is an island which is north. If you'll take yourself into the eastern part of Russia, which would be somewhat close to Alaska, and go north of that, that's St. Paul Island, and some of the woolly mammoths stayed until 3600 BCE. That's 5,600 years ago, 5,800 years ago. And they existed on Wango Island, that's down near the Aleutians, until 2000 BCE. That's approximately 4,000 years ago. All right, so I want to share with you some photographs and some renderings here. Here's another likeness here of the woolly mammoth. And notice the long tusks there. You can see in the back there, where you can have like fat deposits, to help one survive during periods of time in which there's not much food available. Here's a skeletal system. This is not the skeletal system that I have, but it just gives you an idea of what an assembled skeleton would look like. Now, I want you to take note here to this area. This is where the tusks are here, but note this area here that would lead up into the cranial cavity here. All right, so anyway, so you can imagine that being, a skeleton 10 feet in size. Here's another likeness here. And notice the individual that is sitting on the tusk. I don't know how they supported him anyway. Look at the large size here. It bears the same anatomy as a human. You have the radius and the humerus. And the femur here, the tibia, will be found back in this region right here. Here's another photograph showing you the skeletal system here. Notice the vertebrae that extend in the opposite direction of where our vertebrae normally extend. This, of course, is where the hump would be located. Here's one that shows you the nomenclature here to the skeletal system to a mammoth. All right, and here's a tusk. I had to research this. I got afraid to make this presentation because I thought, well, maybe I'm in violation of some kind of United States law, to have a mammoth bones and tusk, but there's no violation for that. Even though there's ivory that's present in this tusk, it's been in our possession, for 70-something years, and we didn't buy it. We're not going to sell it, and so there's no trafficking in this whatsoever. This tusk, by the way, I have it in well, I'm not going to tell you where it is. It's in my possession. But from here over to the other end here is probably 4.5 to 5 feet. It's and heavy as can be. Here's some of the bones out of the skeletal system. Notice the card table that is behind it. You can see the legs of the card table, so that stands about, almost 3 feet. And these bones here, which are the leg bones, of the woolly mammoth, are 2.5, at least 2.5 feet, maybe larger than that. This shows you one of the hip sockets here to the mammoth. this the joint here, I placed part of the joint here. That's larger than a coconut. I mean, it's not the size of a volleyball, but it's very large, much larger than a softball. Here's another section of the bones here, and here's some more. And these are on that table. Each of these sections here, like these, they're about 2 feet in size there. Just a section, miscellaneous bones. You can also see a section of a tusk. Here's a tusk, which is right here. Now, notice here it has this bark on it. And really, if you go back to the photograph I showed you earlier, let's see if I can find it very quickly here. And I'm talking about this area right here, this area. And that's where some of these sections come from, like right here. And the people refer to them as bark, and because it really looks like the bark of a tree. And let me show you here. This is what I'm talking about. You have the tusk, which is here. You can see the ivory down on the inside, and very, very valuable, by the way, but I have no intention of selling that whatsoever. Here's the bark. You can see the bark that's right here. It's just like the bark on a tree. This is valuable likewise, and I'll show you some in just a few minutes. So the other sections here, just of the mammoth, more sections of mammoth bones. These are just fragments, parts of the tusk. I'm not sure what this is. It's fossilized rocks. There were a great number of fossils that were present in there. Here it is. There's some fossilized stones. All right, I'm going to show you what some of the bark looks like. And these are very valuable. Here, this is the part that surrounds the ivory, but just a section like this, probably runs for around $700. Of course, I have no intention of selling that. Here's some more of it, right there. I gave sections of this to all my family members. I don't know if they really appreciated it, but I gave it to them anyway. And that's kind of cool, you have the relics here to an animal that disappeared over 10,000 years ago. And I put them in display boxes. So anyway, that was kind of interesting there. And my dad had always told me, that these bones were that of a mammoth. And I had no reason to doubt that whatsoever, and I know that they were of a mammoth. But the crazy thing about it was, about a month ago when I was researching all of this, I found some strange bones that were mixed in with those mammoth bones. And my dad had never told me this, And I thought, well, I wonder what these bones are. And so I'll share some photographs with you of some of these. And this is what I found. And when I first looked at that, I thought, well, that is not a mammoth whatsoever. I said, that happens to be something else. So anyway, it didn't take much to put this together. When you look at it, it looks like a buffalo skull. And what this is a steppe bison. It's not a plains bison. It's a steppe bison. It's about 25% larger than one of the buffalo that we know of today, that exists today out in the western parts of our country. So it's very large. You can see the skull, which is here. You can see one of the horns right there, and the other one is missing. But I'll show you more on that in just a second here. But that meant that I was in possession of another type of species, and this is a steppe bison. Scientific name, Bison priscus. Its height is 7.5 feet. Its length was 15 feet, if you can imagine that. That's 5 yards. It weighed 3,500 pounds. The horn length from end to end was as much as 7 feet. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it's 25% larger than that of the plains bison. It existed roughly at the same time as that, or I should say coexisted with that of the woolly mammoth in the Middle Pleistocene period to the mid-Holocene epoch, and it went extinct about 3,500 years ago. And this is a skeleton of the plains bison, which is virtually identical to that this is a steppe bison, which is virtually identical to that of the plains bison. And there we go. Right. Here shows you a photograph. That's the same skull that you were looking at earlier. I placed a golf ball down here, so if you look at the golf ball, kind of give you a size perspective on this. It's a huge, huge in size and very heavy too. Another photograph. I don't know if you can see this very well, but here is the golf ball. If you see the golf ball right there, and then you can see the size of that one horn. I tried to match this up to the skull, and I'm not convinced that this is the missing horn from that skull. Perhaps it was, I don't know. And here's part of the mandible of the steppe bison. You can still see the teeth intact. That's from 10,000 years ago, my friends. Here's close-up showing you the dentition, showing you the mandible and the teeth of that steppe bison. Here's some of the bones here, and I did not take the time to try to identify all of these. I know some of these are from the plains bison. Excuse me, I don't know why I keep saying that, from the steppe bison. If you look at the bones over here, those are. And really, these are probably some of the longer bones here of the mammoth. Like I said, they're all placed in the same box together, and the same boxes together. I'm not sure what they are. Here's another one here. This shows you the vertebral column. And at first I thought this was part of the mammoth, but I'm not convinced that it is. I think it came from the plains bison instead. And you could actually take the vertebrae and just kind of piece those together and form them back in place like they were 10,000 years ago. All right, another, this part of the vertebral column here. Okay, and I'll show you, this is my final photograph, and I'm going to close out this presentation. This actually went a little bit longer than I thought it would take place. But there's my little puppy. And he had great fun with that. He always called it a dinosaur bone. That's not a dinosaur bone. It's a mammoth bone. In fact, it looks like he's chewing on that bone. But I had to pose the picture because he didn't want to have anything to do with it whatsoever. He was frightened of the bone. But anyway, it made a good photograph that here he was chewing on a 10,000-year-old bone. Okay, so anyway, that's our presentation for today that deals with the woolly mammoth and steppe bison. Thank you very much for your attention.